Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshak.
Today, our guest is session musician Mark Hill.
Hey, boys.
One of the most in-demand session musicians in town. Before we get started, remember to subscribe wherever you listen, hit notifications, all that stuff. Tell a friend. Mark Hill is one of my favorite bass players in town, and maybe my favorite.
There we go. I like where you're going with that.
Well, I don't think there's a session. I'll tell you how much I like him. If I have a session and I can't get Mark Hill, I'll think about rebooking my session.
Oh, God.
That's a good one, right?
I got my wallet right
No
here,
pressure.
and there you go.
Well, you're just so good. You know, you take...
Thank you, Joe.
And playing bass is so much fun, you know. As a closeted bass player, I am one of the best bass players in Nashville. If you give me about 48 hours in a Pro Tools rig.
That's how I play guitar, right?
But you can do it. There's so many things that you do in a session that elevate it, man. It's not just tone, it's just approach. There is something about it. You bring, like we say with guys like Near Z and Todd Zuckerman, you bring an artistry to the bass that is like, it separates you from the bass. It's like, I hire you because of your artistry, the way you think.
Oh, wow.
And you just make everything better.
What's your background, Mark? Where are you from? How did you get into the bass?
So,
how did you make your way to Nashville?
Right.
How did you get into the bass? It sounds like a mom and dad question. How'd you get into the bass, Mark? Tell us about
It's a
it.
sordid past. Excuse me. So I grew up in a somewhat musical family on a 2,000-acre farm.
Oh, my.
You know, I used to drive tractors, you know, the whole bit.
What state?
Illinois. So
2,000
which is,
acres.
yeah, not all connected. You know, there was 800 here, 130 here.
Wow.
At its peak, that was the biggest it ever got. But it was a great way to grow up. You know, because there would be times I'd be on a tractor with a cab, air conditioning, rocking John Mellencamp and going, he's singing about me, you know.
Yeah.
So, and then I got to play Farm Aid.
Oh, wow.
Which was cool, yeah. So I'd always heard about it. And then with Martina McBride, I got to play Farm Aid. And I'm standing there, we're about to go on, and there's little short John Mellencamp standing there. I was like, holy shit, there he is right there. So, but just, it was a somewhat musical family, little gospel band, and we came to Nashville to do a little record, right? And they hired these session players, and I was just standing there at 11, 12 years old, going, wow, these guys just walked in, heard the song one time, made this little notation, which I found out later was the Nashville number system, and they played it back to us perfectly. And I was like, that's what I want to do.
Wow.
And you
No
were playing
question.
bass in this band?
I was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that always impressed me. My first Nashville session that I just like is, I was in one of these dates where so Nashville has sessions at 10 a.m., 2, and 6. So it's a union-based city, so you get 3 hours with a band, and people try to cram as many songs in there as possible.
Yeah.
I had a song on a demo session, you know, one of these deals where
Right.
different songwriters are coming in, same band. And I remember them talking to each other going, let's go down to line 12, 4455.
Yeah,
And
that's
I was
the
like-
shorthand of
and I
that's
was like,
4 bars, yeah.
And I had been in the music business for 20 years at this point, and I was just like, what
are
the
these
heck is a
hillbillies
talking about?
4455?
Right.
But there is this thing that you're talking about. That's like, you have to be in it to believe it. When you watch a recording session, we talk about how it used to be you'd set up and get drum sounds the first day and make a record, maybe record 10 songs over a week and a half in a barn in upstate New York.
Right.
You go to Nashville.
And we have done that here too.
That happens.
Yeah,
but
not as much.
I tell people the reason why we can afford to have these studios is not because of all these records you hear. It's all the demos.
Right.
Every day.
Meat and taters, I call them.
And you have like, it's a guarantee on a demo session. If you get 3, you're really upset. Usually 4. I used to get 5 in all mine.
Mm-hmm.
I know Robert Ellis Orrell.
9.
They used to call him REO Speedwagon.
You didn't get a piss break.
It in 3 hours this is. So you're running at least 6 songs with Robert Ellis Orrell, right?
7 to 8, because he would just stack the charts up, and
As
you
it's
just
ringing
you wouldn't
out.
even get up. Yeah, it's like next page. you
Robert
know, turn it
Ellis
over.
Orrell is a great songwriter in town and a great producer and,
Right.
and famous for like getting every second of a demo session.
Right.
At 5 songs in a demo session, you are wrapping up from the beginning of playing the work tape, which is usually just on an iPhone, like a guitar vocal,
Right.
to the point you print it and listen to the next one. It's 36 minutes. and it sounds like a record. And if you're Robert Ellis
It
Earl,
sounds like a record immediately.
it sounds like a record immediately. And if you're Robert Ellis Earl, it's every 18 minutes. So I, as a
At
young...
this point in my career, I'll pass on that.
I, as a young songwriter, was like, I just couldn't believe it. You walk into this session, like you said, and they hear it one time, and they play it as if, and I had been in bands that we practiced the same 8 songs for 10 days,
Right.
or years playing out,
Right.
So it was just, there's something about a recording session. It's like, how do they do that? Could I be a part of that? If I could, how do I fit in? It's just such an amazing process that you're like, that was a magic trick. It's a David Blaine magic trick.
Well, and the funny part is you say, we get one listen to it, and most of us aren't. I mean, we're kind of listening, but somebody's telling a joke over here and a story over
Right.
here, and it's just banter.
Yeah, you're like, these guys aren't listening. And then they go, just lay it down.
Yeah, it's somewhat formula based because everybody's trying to get on the radio. The demo session is to sell a song. It's not necessarily to sell an artist.
Right.
You're trying to sell a song for a publisher to pitch to.
But
an
here's
artist
what
to
you
cut.
do great. In great session musicians, there's a ton of session musicians, but there's a top crop that, like, let's say you have a progression that goes 1, 4, 5, and then it's like you have that change, the 4 over the 5 or 5 over 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like some guys, they have 3 licks for that.
Right.
And you start to recognize, wait a minute, I heard that before.
Right.
Like guys like you, guys that are really at the top, I never hear them repeating themselves. And I'm like, how do you have a music vocabulary? How does this guy, he's thinking, he's playing, when you watch Bukovac, like on his videos.
Unbelievable.
And it's all that stream of consciousness. You're like, how does, he's just thinking of a note, right? And then it's like from there to here, and it doesn't travel that way for me because I just don't have that.
Right.
It's part of it's training, part of it's a gift. But like, how do you do that? Like when I'm watching you play, it's like, how do you conceive all these like amazing licks that you're doing and all the pockets and just how to get back out and land on the one? And how are you doing that?
Well, I think we're all, as session players, we're all artists first, because as we came up through the ranks and even back in the day on the farm where I'm going into my room and playing 8 hours a day, that was pretty common for me. What I call that, you're digging your well. How deep is your well? Because at any given time on a session here or anywhere on the row, you're going to get different kinds of songs thrown at you, different kind of vibes. And you got to have that well dug very deeply that you can pull from at any time. And it does become subconscious because you've programmed that just by listening and practicing and listening to every record that comes out over and over again. You're pulling from those references without even thinking about it.
So when you're going from a 1 chord, let's say like in the key of G, everybody, 1 chord would be a G, A minor would be your 2 minor chord, B would be your 3, 4 would be a C, 5 would be a D, 6 would be an
It's
E.
based on the major scale.
Yeah, so we just number them.
Yeah.
So when you're going, if I was reading a chart, and we chart them all out so that they just look like numbers on a page, it's real simple. It's not like when you watch a classical player and they're playing it note for note, right? It's like this is the idea of the bone structure of the song.
Yeah, we're expected to interpret just a chord chart, right? It's not every note's written out for us.
Right.
That's
so
a good
do you
point.
have like stock things? It's like I see 1 chord, 1 chord, 1 chord, 4 chord, and I'm like, okay, here comes the 4.
Right.
4, and I didn't screw it up. But like you do this thing where you go from your 1, and it's like this beautiful transition into a 4 where it's like a melody where you go like up to the 5 and then go back to the 4. It's just like this quick, effortless sort of lick that is that all that stuff that makes it sound like an insane thing.
Right.
Where does that come from? You just practicing changes and how to get from one to another?
Subconscious coming from the well. It really
Thousands
is.
Thousands of songs.
Right.
I don't like that answer.
I know.
I want something that I can literally
There's
light bulb
nothing
on.
stock about it. To me, it's custom tailored for what's the vibe of the song? What's the song requesting that change from 1 to 4 is? What's the vocal doing in that space?
Right.
Is there a vocal in that? Is it just space where you can step out and frame what's coming up from the vocal?
Here's a question for you. What does your headphone mix sound like?
Well, we have the pleasure of working with the best engineers on the planet. So when I sit down,
thanks, Mark.
when I sit down and play the first note, it just sounds so friggin' great, So first of all, I hate the big boxes. Like, Blackbird, they have these big Mackie boxes, and I just look at that thing and I go, that ain't my gig. Right. If I look in there and I've got whatever great engineer, I'm going, like just the other day, Ben Fowler. And I don't even touch the box. It's like there's a 2-mix, even with all those faders, there's a 2-mix, vocal, and click. And that's the ones I touch. Everything else I leave alone. Because
And then they have like a more me of the other stuff?
Yes.
So if you wanted more bass, you could just have an isolated bass to add with the 2-mix.
Totally. If they even have kick and snare separate where you can enhance the drum mix a little bit. But it's like, if that's what he's listening to in there, and that's what I'm going to hear when I walk in the control room, then you're going to know exactly how your part is affecting the song, right?
So you don't favor drums being louder than anything else, or vocals being louder?
I typically do like drums a little louder. I definitely want the vocal up front.
And is it the entire kit, or are you just favoring the kick?
Entire kit.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a blend of the entire kit.
Yeah, that's cool.
And most of these studios, you would say, have the Aviom system, right?
No, I wouldn't. What I'm seeing more than anything these days is the MyTech boxes, and those are by far my favorite.
Okay.
Because they're, back in the day, the Q8 systems that were British, I guess they call them the fold back, right?
Yeah, those were horrible.
Well, but they were horrible because they were always crapping out, but they were punchy. They sounded more like a console. Like a lot of these newer boxes are underpowered to me. So to get what I call the punch factor, where I can really feel the bass note inside that kick, because that's my world, right? Mm-hmm. Those MyTechs have that. And not many of these digital boxes have that punch factor, but those have it.
What do you have in your studio?
I have the Furman small 4-knob boxes, which are very musical boxes.
I had that.
Yeah.
And then it just wasn't enough. And I went up to the hear back. It's like a vertical thing with like 8 channels.
Yeah.
And the headphone amp inside of that sounded horrible.
Yeah.
Like
that's one of the ones that were kind of digitally and like...
it was just like you could, no matter how good the mix was, it was like you were playing it through a tiny little Walkman on the beach, And the Avioms, I think, sound good.
Yeah, I do have a couple of studios that have those.
Yeah.
And they are really good.
I was telling people that it was like...
The Behringers?
Not good? Because I see them and I get excited because they look like the Avioms. It's like, oh, these are super cheap, right? Because I have 8 boxes of the Aviom.
My techs are way up there.
Yeah, well, I think that the Aviom system that I have is over 10 grand.
Oh.
When you add it all together.
Yeah.
All the, there's like a switch and a analog, digital to analog converter and all this stuff. Or analog to digital converter. So all those boxes came on the market like 15 years ago. And before that, when I was engineering records, I'd spend my entire time getting headphone mixes for the band. Mm-hmm. And in between every song, it was like, hey, Joe, could you turn up my bass drummer? I'm like, and someone else like, do this to mine. And it was just like, I couldn't make the record. So I loved it because as soon as those boxes came out, it was like, I could finally make the record. And I want the band to be happy, but I want to be happy too. Like, I need to make sure we're getting a good record. Those have been single-handedly one of my favorite parts about it. Tell me about, so when we do tracking dates here in town, like at my barn, we'll have usually 5 or 6 guys. So we have a drummer, a bass player, a piano B3 player, at least one electric guitar player, and a utility player. Utility player will play everything from banjo to bouzouki to acoustic to fiddle to lap steel to you name it. And usually a vocalist that we put in the bathroom. Because we got some Thai lines.
Because that's where they belong. No.
And I will tell you this. We had a session once and one of the session musicians got sick.
Oh, I was here.
And went in and blew up the bathroom. Blew it up. And then dude had to go in there and sing. It was the dude came up to me afterwards. He was like, man, I was going to pass out in there. It was just like, it was bad news.
Isn't that the one where we had to call somebody to?
Yes. Yeah. It was, we had a lot of people here. It was a corporate thing.
It was so there's maybe film crew.
Oh no, it was a film crew. It was a film crew. They were here with Sony Red cameras.
Because the guy
it was
we
a
called
$60,000 shoot day.
Oh, the guy we called. I didn't tell him about because I was leading, I think, and I didn't tell him about the cameras. And on the way home, he was like, "Dude, what the hell?"
And then
I was in my sweats, man.
Really great guy. It was Steve Brewster.
Yeah.
And
good friend.
And we played down the track, and I was like, "Hey, dude," and I gave him a couple notes. He goes, "Dude, a half an hour ago, I was on a treadmill."
That's amazing.
Immediately,
give me a second.
Immediately diffused me.
Right.
And he was right. I left him alone, and he was awesome. He was killer. So we do these sessions with, that's the sort of setup. And everyone is just like, okay, they hear the song, and then they sit down, and they play through it once. And usually, there are times that you can keep the first take. Maybe the second tape, most likely the third take.
Yeah.
And then the process is like, all right, guys,
Fine tuning.
get me, and then people like Mark will say, hey, take me back to line 4 and give me that first half of the chorus. And you go back and punch him, and someone else says, hey, punch me in for that too. So now you're doing overdubs.
Yeah.
And then it's like, hey, I'm going to do an all skate is when everybody goes again. And it's like,
right.
okay, drummer's going to play on the second pass over the track. Drummer's going to play tambourine. Guitar player's going to double his guitar part. Mark is usually done at this point and sitting eating food in the kitchen. The piano player's usually putting a B3 part on.
Right.
The guitar player's usually putting a banjo part on. And you go down, and this is how you do songs in 12 minutes.
Yeah.
And
it works.
It totally works.
Yeah.
The other way to do songs is track building.
Right.
Which is like, hey, Mark, come over to my place. I got a song I want you to play on. Mark shows up with his bass, starts to play, and it's just to a track.
Right.
But I find in those sessions, I'm all up in someone's grill where I'll leave them alone during the tracking day.
Totally.
If I bring in a drummer, it's like we start talking about kick parts. Hey, what if you won?
Let's try this. Let's try that. Yeah, right.
And I don't do that in the other version.
Right.
And there's great outcomes that come from both of those things, right?
I totally get both camps. Yeah.
But there's almost a beauty that happens in this synergy of band playing together because bass player starts to do this thing and the drummer goes, oh, yeah, I hear that, and I'm going to do this
We're
thing.
playing off of each other, and to
Right.
me, that's what music is about. I always call it communicating without speaking because that happens all the time.
Yeah,
You know,
it's a
kick patterns and
literally is
bass
a language.
patterns. It's like I'll hear the drummer do like an end of 3 groove change on the bottom end, and the next time that part of the song comes around, I'll be on it with him.
Exactly.
And we never talked about it.
And you
know,
don't, when you listen to a Fleetwood Mac record like Rumors, or you listen to
that they spent a year making.
an old Al Green record, or you listen to, I'm trying to think of good examples of those kinds of performance, like what you imagine the band would have done, right? You know? And it's like, those records sound different for that process. And as much as I love that, there'll always be a new song that comes out. Like I just heard Florida Georgia Line's song that Jeff Giuliano mixed it, he had it up. And I'd like to say I didn't love it, but I loved it. I mean, it sounded great because Jeff mixed it.
Right.
But the song was super catchy. And it was completely track built. You know, one of those deals where it's like every nook and cranny had someone moving it around on a screen somewhere.
Right.
But it's like, I have to give it up, you know, because you want to be in a camp and say, that's the way you make records. That's the way they were always made. Listen to this person and Johnny Cash and this record and that record. But at the end of the day, it's like, there's some great stuff that's done the other way.
Absolutely. Well,
you just
AC/DC, man.
Yeah.
To me, those records still stand up today. And, and they were scoped and, you know, they were all played as a band, but it was...
Do you think that Back in Black was done like that?
Man, I do. I think that
How? Was there even editors back then? I mean,
No, I don't mean editing. I mean just playing it over and over and over again.
Do you think that Mutt Lange wore those guys out on Back in Black? I find that...
Okay, I have a story about that.
I don't know.
I think he did. I had read stuff about him where he was...
That's like, I always imagine no.
And that they... Yeah, I don't think they used him again after that, did they? They used him on
because
Highway
that was
to Hell.
back in-
Highway to Hell, because we were talking to what's his name? Tony Platt, we're trying to get on the program.
Nice.
And he did both of those records. So I'm assuming it was a Mutt Lange thing, but it might not have been.
Well, you know, that was before Pro Tools too. So, you know, Mutt was working with tape, so it was either editing by cutting tape or play it over and over until you get what you want. Right?
I had a conversation. I had Glenn Duncan, who's for those that don't know, is an unbelievable fiddle player, banjo player, just a
great musician,
unbelievable musician.
Great stories too.
So, So he was telling me a story. You know, Glenn played on all the Shania Twain stuff, or a lot of the big stuff. You know, bum bum ba da da da. He did all that stuff. So I was asking. I've been obsessed with Mutt Lange forever.
Yeah.
So, you know, I asked him how many takes would you do? You know, what is a Mutt Lange thing? He's like, you know, this is the misnomer about Mutt Lange, is it's not 100 takes to get 100 takes. It's 100 takes to get it exactly how he wants it. If you get that on the second take,
it's okay.
You're good.
Oh wow.
And he goes, we're good. Let's move on. So it's not about, I think people think it's like this brutality of like repetition. It's not. He has a certain way and he just is relentless in getting to the way. But if you hit it first, second take, you're good.
Have you worked with Mutt Lange?
I have not. I was going to tell a story though. A buddy of mine, Mike Johnson, steel player.
Yeah.
We've known each other forever. He went to, was it Switzerland where he lived?
Yeah, he lived in Switzerland.
He went over there to play steel for him. And he said it was pretty intense. You know, it's like I think it's what you're saying though. It's like he's looking for what he's looking for.
Yeah.
He's not trying to beat him up.
No.
But he said, you know, he had this way of reading you psychologically. And he said, right as he felt like you were reaching your breaking point, in would walk this girl with Swiss chocolate and a fresh pot of this amazing coffee. And he would take a little break, hand you some chocolate, cup of coffee, talk about life, and bring you back down, and then put you back in the tank.
That's wild.
Isn't that great?
So genius.
Well, I'm going to say something wildly unpopular.
Uh-oh.
So Mutt Lange did Heartbeat City, right? For the Cars. Or for the
Yeah, the Cars.
Yeah, that was, what was their, was it Heartbeat City?
Magic, yeah.
Okay. What was like Just What I Needed on?
Oh, that's early Cars. Yeah, that's on the Cars, I believe. Candia was the first one, right? And then the Cars, I think, was the second one.
Well, he did that. He did, he did the AC/DC stuff. Then he went into this period where he started doing Def Leppard,
yeah.
right? And he did Foreigner 4 too, didn't he?
Yep.
Brilliant record. And then he did, what was the first
Shame the guy hadn't had any success.
Def Leppard? Pyromania. He did Pyromania,
Yeah, right.
which was maybe one of the best rock records ever.
Oh, yeah.
And then he started doing Hysteria,
Different vibe.
Animal, all the other stuff. And when he kind of ate himself. Like, those records are so, there's not even a band in there anymore.
Right.
It feels like you could go buy a vocal plug-in pack and make those records.
Right.
Whereas, like, I loved all that old Car stuff, AC/DC stuff, because it was like a little bit of band, but really focused through the lens of Mutt Lange, right?
Right.
But whenever we got into the Shania Twain stuff, and that stuff is great, but when my big pet peeve was the older Def Leppard or the newer Def Leppard stuff.
Yeah.
It was just, there was no band there.
It makes you wonder if it was a gear era that was going on where he was.
Probably.
But it was just the
Experimenting with-
process. It was so separated and sterile. And then there's that Jim Steinman record that they did, Def Leppard, and they said that we'd stand around the console and we'd ask ourselves, what would Mutt do? Because Mutt couldn't do the record, right? And it's like they said they would all just sit there and they were trying to get this guitar to, and they're flying all around the world to get this in every amp, and then they come to find out it was a Rockman that everything was done through. But they said they would spend continued hours standing behind the consoles with their arms crossed, looking down at it with Steinman, and who was the engineer? A really great engineer.
Neil Dorsman.
Neil Dorsman. And
WWMD, what would Mutt do?
yeah, they were just like, what do you think Mutt would do? And it was just an unsolvable thing.
He's got, like you said, he's got a real sonic imprint, and it's hard to replicate it.
Well, that's
But Back in Black, dude, I still have the
Incredible.
LP of that.
Incredible.
Play it for my boys sometimes, and just like, listen to those guitars, man.
I had this car that had
Pocket.
this great stereo in it. And my kids, I had two daughters, and they were both real little. And we went up to upstate New York, where I'm from, and it was a beautiful summer day. And we were going to this popcorn stand that's been around for like 100 years in this area. So we took a ride, and I played them Back in Black, playing the song Back in Black. You know,
Hell
and the
yeah.
stereo was like unreal in this car. And I remember my daughter was like, Daddy, that's the biggest hit I've ever heard. She was like 5.
And she's right.
yeah, man.
But even the Shania stuff,
So-
like that song's still the one.
It's incredible.
When it comes on the radio, it's just like
He
holy
knows
shit.
everything that's important about a song.
He does.
Like when I produce a record, as I got older, I started to like turn things off that I had played. The older I got, the less tracks where I was just like, this is doing nothing for the song other than making it difficult for me to hear the kick and snare.
Right.
Right?
Space is good.
Space is good, and you have to know what it is that is the center of the song. What it is that's important. It's times like, and you've got all this ability as a bass player, but it's like most of your time you're operating at maybe 15 to 20% of your potential because your better sense says, hey, this is my job first. I got to lay it
playing
down.
for the song and not for the bass players that are listening.
I know,
right?
because I'll be like, hey, Mark, can you get up more into the melody line? And it's like, oh yeah, I can,
Which is good
I can do
sometimes.
that.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's not a
Absolutely.
natural inclination because people, there's a process of like what it takes to make sure the song is great and your bass part isn't great.
Right. Well, there's a running joke with bass players, and I even had a piece of tape on my '63 jazz bass that had right at the 5th fret that had an arrow pointing toward the headstock.
Like, play this
and
way.
somebody walked up and said, "What's that about?" I said, "All the money is down there."
That's amazing.
Right.
That's incredible.
Get up here. Yeah.
So have you been in a session where you like, because all the music that happens in Nashville is incredibly similar. And I'm sure that, and we'll get into this, like every time someone comes in, it's like whatever was a hit in the past, whatever was a massive hit in the past 10 months, it's like, hey, can it be more like the Killers? Or hey, think Lady Antebellum. Hey, think, this last hit, right?
Well, that goes back to the well. Are you constantly refilling your well as a musician?
Right.
Right, because you constantly have to listen to, even if I don't like it as much as, like, I'm a child of the 70s, so that was my era, Earth, Wind, and Fire. And,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All that kind of stuff. So you're just constantly having to listen and make sure your well is full of what somebody's going to ask you to do, and make sure you're aware of it and what it is and what the tones are, and it's a constant learning.
So what
curve.
I want to know is when you are doing that 99% of the time, and then you get a call for a date from somebody that comes from São Paulo, Brazil, right? And it's some whacked out Chick Corea session. Now, do you freak out at all? I know you've been doing this forever, so you can't freak out.
Oh,
but like
I can.
in my heart,
Sure
I would be like,
can.
holy crap, this is like, I'm not prepared mentally for what they're going to ask me to do.
I have wound up on a few unprepared, where it's just so, like you're saying, it's so out of left field. I'm not a heavy reader, and I'm running into that more. I'm learning how to read even now, trying to brush up that skill. But if I get a call like that where it's somebody I don't know, I start quizzing. Like, okay,
So like,
what's
but you've
the
got to
vibe?
get like real Latin stuff, which I'm sure you'd be really easy for you. But like we're talking,
I've
like,
studied that stuff.
let's talk like, if you're talking about, a session that is sort of like Snarky Puppy, where it's like, you're not going to be treading water at all in this song.
Right, and that's not the kind of session you would do 5 songs in 3 hours too.
No.
So you typically will have more time to work with that.
Yeah, but what's your anxiety level? I mean, how long have you been a session player in town?
30 years.
Okay, so 30 years, you've seen it all, you've done it all.
Pretty
What
much,
is
yeah.
the thing that gets you like feeling like you're 15 again? Like, oh no,
What gets me feeling like I'm 15 again,
like out of fear.
out of fear, a reading date.
A reading date.
Or upright. I'm pretty much a neo upright guy. You might even say I'm an upright owner as opposed to a player. But it's getting better, and I finally got a good upright. So I actually had an upright session this week, and it was great. It went great. But reading dates,
So people will still come in with like bar clef music.
6 pages of notes written out, and they want it verbatim. I'll tell you, here's a good example. I worked with this guy, and here's where I didn't do my research, my quizzing, and I failed myself. This dude calls from Quebec, and his name is Benoit, right? And very, very, very broken English. It was all email, but when I finally did talk to him, it's like the communication barrier was tough. And a very interesting artist, really cool stuff, right? I can't even put a vibe on it. It was a lot of bass, right? Really intense. He shows up and he had done all his bass parts in Logic and printed out in Logic.
The notation here.
You can print out the notation, which is not necessarily how an arranger would write it. It's kind of a computer
Right.
generated
The
like
context isn't
vibe
there.
of what it is, right? And holy crap, it was 3 pages per song. Lots of
He wanted it exact.
Really, really groovy, busy bass stuff. And I just remember, I actually busted him on the charts at one point. I was like, Benoit, old pal, old buddy, these charts are shit. I mean, if you're gonna present me with something, you want this verbatim, you need to have a guy write it. Like go into the computer and really do it the way it's supposed to look, right? Because, for a novice reader like myself, when it's not written correctly, that makes the battle even harder.
Right.
But, and I was kind of mess. We had time. I think we did maybe 6 or 8 songs over 2 days.
Okay.
So we had more time than normal. But I just remember at one point, and he was like really apologetic, like, I know I'm an asshole, but making you play. And I'm like, no. I want to get what you want. That's my job. It's a service industry. But I just remember finally getting it, right? It's like, oh, yeah, I got this now. Where the spaces are, where the pocket is. And I look in there, and he's dancing, jumping up and down, right? And it was like, okay, got it.
What are some sessions, you've played on a million hit records. What are some sessions that stand out as your favorite sessions in your 30-year career?
Well, anyone that Joe's produced.
Insert applause.
There's your music lesson right
you can
there.
give the money,
That's how you make it in the
money
music
back
business,
now.
right?
That's how you get called back for a record date.
You know, man, I always go back to this record, but it was a long time ago. Wes Cunningham. I don't know if you've ever heard this record.
I don't.
He was a Warner Brothers artist.
Country artist?
No, very quirky pop. And I was working with a guy named Monroe Jones, producer I worked with forever. And he called me to lead these sessions, right? This is way back. So I'm saying 93, 94, somewhere in there. And Monroe wanted me to lead. So he gives me a cassette of the 4-track demos this cat had made in his apartment or whatever. He's from Texas. He's now a school teacher in Chicago, which is a travesty to me. But I think Warner Brothers they just didn't do their gig on this record. It never did anything. But it's still my favorite record I've ever played on.
Wow.
Wes Cunningham, 12 Ways to Win People to Your Way of Thinking.
Oh,
It's on Spotify?
It is. It's still on Spotify.
that's cool. Okay.
How about what are the most, what would be epic, large, big copyrights you've made records with?
Gosh.
Some people would, you remember a song, it's like, that's one of the biggest songs, and it's like, you're the bass player on it.
One of the put me on the map was a song called My Town by Montgomery Gentry.
Oh, yeah.
It's got a kind of a bass melody thing in it, and
Jeffrey Steele song.
that's right, yeah. And I'm not sure it ever made number one, but it was way up there.
It's a big song.
It was a big song.
That's funny. Radio did this thing where like people were getting a lot of number ones. But before that, there was a different cycle. Number one wasn't always the goal. I was hanging out with Jack Tempchin, who used to be like...
Some of the Eagles stuff.
He wrote a lot of the Eagles stuff, but he was sort of like the way J.D. Southers was with Henley. He was Fry's writing partner. So he wrote You Belong to the City and all that, Smuggler's Blues. But he wrote Peaceful Easy Feeling and what's the other big,
That was the
two
one.
massive
That's
Eagles
a career there.
It peaked at number 30,
No way.
right? And you're like, it was just a different ecosystem back then,
Totally. Yeah, now if it's not top 10, you're...
Now, if it's not top 10, it's like, there's just a different way they deal with it now.
Yeah.
It's a factory of getting it through the charts.
Yeah.
Whereas songs, they might, I guarantee his number 29 or number 30 song has outgrossed all three of my number ones. I guarantee it.
Right.
Because they've been played under the the radio nonstop for 40 years. So people were, how many minutes into this podcast? If you don't realize it, Mark Hill's a great guy. That's a key to being successful as a session player.
Personality.
You said something a second ago. It's like, it's a service industry.
Yeah.
I saw him jumping up and down. I want him to be happy.
Right. Totally.
There's zero, the best session players in this town, I don't want to say they have zero ego, but they have the right ego. They all know that they're capable of anything, and therefore anything that you ask them to do, they're not afraid to do. And so there's none of that like, hey, man.
This is such a great town to produce music in because I find that if you hire guys like yourself or Near, they almost produce themselves. Near's
we do.
Near's like,
But
know
they
what?
always-
And he hears things I don't hear.
Yeah.
And you could say to that guy, like, hey, that thing that you did that was just fantastic, let's do this other thing.
Yeah.
And okay, they're right onto it. They're not like, hey, man, this is my part.
Well, and I'll say this. There is a learning curve to what we're talking about because as I was ramping up, I'm an artist first. Remember I said that. And there were times when I was playing a part that I was so passionate about for this song. And I felt like it was the right thing for the song. And the producer goes, hey, we want you to lay out there. And initially I would fight that some. Be like, are you sure? Are you hearing what's going on there?
You're hearing how
it's
cool
like,
this part is at a point.
It's like, but in the end, you want them to call you back.
Right.
How are you going to make the phone ring again? Well, are you going to do that by arguing with the producer over a part that it's their song?
Right.
And they've called you to play, so.
Well, I think that the sentiment that I get as a producer and songwriter, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, is that they want the best for your song.
Yeah.
And I can we talk about this all the time. If somebody's fighting for the song, we can have an argument and then go get beers, and it's great.
Yeah.
If somebody's arguing out of ego, you're like, get me out of the room. I'm going to get away from
Totally. That's a great point. Yeah.
And you and I have had this conversation. I've been in town for 15 years.
Yeah.
I've done a million sessions. I have worked with maybe thousands of session musicians, there's only two guys in town that I think are assholes.
Yeah.
Not to talk about those two guys. Let's put them over here.
No. I get it.
The other 998 of them, thank you for the math.
Well, I'm pretty good.
I'm a musician. The other 998 are stellar dudes.
Right.
How does how does that happen?
The assholes usually fizzle out.
Oh, yeah. Doesn't last.
Not always. There's a guy I'm thinking of right now that did not fizzle out, but whatever,
Well, I just think it's, rather than focusing on those two, I think it's like, holy cow. When I was in New York, drummers wouldn't tell other drummers, like, hey, I got to go play this. I'm going to my family's, and will you cover my gig? A drummer won't tell another drummer to cover his gig because he doesn't want that drummer to steal his gig.
But what does that say about the drummer that don't want his gig stolen? What does that say about what he thinks about what he's playing?
I think that there's a whole climate and culture of stress. In Nashville, it doesn't exist. I don't know if it's the amount of work, the confidence in the playing, but like Mark calls me and he's like, I can't do that date, or I got a master and I've got a demo session, let's say. And he says, I just got
two different money scales.
Yeah, I just got a double scale master. And I'm like, I get it. Yeah. And it's like, okay. He says, I called these three people. Which one do you want? And you'll get a replacement for yourself.
Hell yeah.
And you'll share gigs and say, hey, I can't go out with Reba. Will you go out with Reba?
Because I still care about your session and I want it to go off flawlessly for you.
And you like your friends.
So you'll call me back.
You like your bass player friends.
Hell yeah. We get together sometimes. Right. Yeah.
That's a unique culture to Nashville. Did you, in New York, they didn't feel that way to me.
I don't recall feeling like that at all.
Yeah, New York was like, you looked at each other like you were.
Alley.
Yeah.
You looked at each other like you're definitely in the same pack, but you're a pack of coyotes. But, you're kind of looking over at other drummer dude and looking over at the buffalo carcass, and you're kind of like, I don't want him to get, there is this thing where it's like, we are the same, but we're not going to totally cooperate. It's an interesting dynamic.
And that keeps you getting better too. It makes you a better player, right? Knowing that there's 5 other bass players right around the corner,
right. Yeah.
I'll give you a good story about this. And I've told this story before. It's one of the most dear stories to me about mentorship and what this town was capable of. I'm not sure it's still quite as mentorship driven. It seems like it's changing a little bit, but when I first moved here, there was a black bass player named Jackie Street. Badass bass player, just funky, great bass player. And, Jimmy Lee Slows and he were kind of my mentors. They drug me around to sessions, let me watch better than any school you could pay for, right? I'm sitting in the studio watching Slows do a bass track, sitting in the studio watching Jackie do a bass track. Over and over again, right? Well, on one of those days that I was kind of fly on the wall with Jackie, we went to lunch. And it was Jackie Street, John Hammond, I think maybe Mark Baldwin was the guitar player. And we're just sitting around the table, and I'm going, how do you get the ball rolling? How does this work, right? And they're all just kind of like, well, it just happens. Just your name will, once you play on a few things, your name will get out, and there you go, right? And I'm still in awe, I'm just sitting there going, I still don't get that,
Right.
And John Hammond bought my lunch that day, which I thought was amazing. That's cool. Drummer that I had read his name on records a million times. And I get to work with today, these days. So anyway, I left that lunch. And so the whole lunch was about how do I get work? How do I get work? How do I get going? Left the lunch, and this was before cell phones, so it was answering machines. I ran some errands, and by the time I got home, my message light was blinking. And so I played the message and like, hey, I got your name from Jackie Street. And he's got a showcase that he's not going to be able to do because he's gotten a master session. He'd like for you to do that showcase. Showcases back then where you show up, learn the tunes, rehearse the tunes, and then that night you do the showcase.
At a live venue.
At a live venue.
For record
right.
execs.
Yeah, exactly. So the date comes around. I show up at the venue, start setting up, getting, I've got my shit together. And I look back at the console and there's Jackie Street. And I'm terrified because it's like, I don't want to play in front of Jackie Street. He's such a badass.
Not to mention he said he couldn't do it because he had a gig.
Right. Bingo. There you go. So, we rehearsed for a minute, and Jackie was a very soft-spoken, sweet, sweet guy. He passed away a few years ago. Just a great guy. So I walk back to the console. I'm like, "Hey, Jackie, what you doing here?" You know, and he kind of had snaggly teeth, and he always covered his mouth. And he just he didn't say anything. He was very soft spoken, and he never did say anything. And we did the rehearsal, and he left. Right. Well, fast forward to the show that night, 7:30 or whatever. The record execs start coming in, mingling in, and they're mingling. I'm up there tuning, and I look back at the console, Jackie Street, stand at the console. And I'm like, shit. Like, this isn't nerve-wracking enough, you know? And I'm telling you guys, Jackie canceled that show to give me work.
That's incredible.
He never admitted it. But I asked him that over the 20 years that we hung out, and he would always just go and laugh.
That's cool.
But isn't that the humanity, not to
Well,
mention the mentorship involved in that?
When you were saying, like, Jimmy Lee Sloas and Jackie would have you come to sit in sessions, what's the upside for them?
Fostering new, good talent.
Okay, there's zero. Financially, it's not in their best interest. You've
No.
now just brought another investment banker into your investment banking meeting.
Right.
But if you really live that life and live it genuinely, how many times did you call Jimmy Lee Sloas, you know, or anyone else and say, hey, I got this thing, can you do it?
Paying it forward.
Right. So there is a version of socialism here that really seems to work.
It works, yeah.
If your heart is right with it.
Right.
And Nashville is filled with that. It's a really cool town
Well,
that way.
and the way I take the
but don't come here. Stay wherever you're at.
We've
Don't
got
come
enough.
here. We're full.
We've got enough. My takeaway from that is how confident are they in their abilities to foster, to bring in
Absolute
and foster
confidence.
young talent. And not long ago, you know who Tommy Sims is. He's not one that I ever got to hang out with much, but certainly listened to him over the years. His solo record is one of my favorite records ever. But not long ago, I ran across some footage of him playing one of his songs from his solo record at a church. And it moved me, man. It was like, sometimes I'll go on a deep dive of bass players like Chuck Reedy or whatever. And that day I was just diving on Tommy and just digging out some stuff. And so I texted a buddy of mine, Dan Needham, drummer, who's worked with Tommy many times, said, hey, dude, can I get Tommy's number? I just want to send him some love and just say, hey, man, you're part of the reason I'm here, and I always love what you did. And so he did, and I texted Tommy, and I got the coolest, longest text back from Tommy. And one of the things that said in it was, you know, Jimmy Lee called me early on when you moved to town and said, you got to check out this Hill guy. He's a real deal. And I was just like, I'm going to frame that and hang it in my studio, you know.
Yeah.
I kept the text. I still have it.
Oh, that's killer, man.
So cool.
Those guys, and Jimmy Lee Sloas he's the only one
he's
else
done more
that
for
I'll
me
hire.
than
And he's a great bass player.
oh,
He's out of his mind.
best. Yeah.
We're trying to get him on the podcast.
Good luck with that.
When I text him about anything, he texts me back, and it's much love. I text him about the podcast, and it's like nothing. So,
He's a very private guy, which I like the mystery of that.
yeah, he's mysterious.
Because I remember, you know, when I was listening to records and have a pile of records on the floor and reading bass players' names, seeing Joe Osborne's name over and over again and just going, I wonder what he looks like.
Yeah.
You know, there was no Facebook. There was no
Yeah, right.
YouTube to dial him in.
The mystery was kind of
The mystery
cooler.
was cool, yeah.
Hey, can we talk real quick about session life? Okay, so like we said, everything goes through the union, right, in town. And if it doesn't go through the union, it goes...
If Dave Pomeroy is listening, yes. No way.
It goes through the pricing of the union. You know, it's
Sure.
the prices are withheld or upheld. There's different scales. So when you come to town, if you're making a demo means like, hey, you can play it within the industry and try to get it cut or get it exploited, but you can't go out and sell it and
Right.
make money off of it. A demo scale, you know, and these change all the time, but with all the fees, there's a sideman fee, there's a leader fee. So if Mark is the leader for the session, he'll write out all the charts and sort of arrange everything and call the band.
Yeah,
and-
the leader of the session, of any session, whether it's demo, master, limited pressing, or whatever, is the only guy that's heard the songs prior to the session.
And you, in essence, are de facto liaison to whoever it is that's creating music. That
Yeah,
day.
we'll talk a few times, email or text, whatever, and yeah.
But with all the fees in union and pension and health and welfare and self-cartage, it's about $200 for 3 hours.
Something like that, yeah.
Right? And then so that's the demo fee. And if you're the leader, you get paid $400, essentially double.
It's usually double, yeah.
Yeah, or thereabouts. And if you go ahead and have a session with limited pressing, now they've changed this recently. It used to be about $225 to $230, $240, right, with all the fees.
Something like that, yeah.
And then there's low budget master, which was a little bit more. It was like $300.
And what identifies those two things is limited pressing is you can You can do that scale as long as you don't press any more than 10,000 records.
Right.
And if you happen to sell over that, you have to bump it up to master scale.
And
Low budget master is based on the budget that you're working under. I think
less
it's
than 100 grand.
Yeah, something like that.
Right.
And then it's a master, so you don't ever have to bump up the scale.
Right. And then there's master scale. So whenever you go in to do a Reba McEntire record, you get paid the master scale, which I thought was 380-ish.
No, it's 425-ish.
Okay, 425 with all the little fees. And the leader would get double. So all these things, so you come to town, you're making a record, you do it under master scale, or you do it under limited pressing or low budget master if you're an independent artist. Or you could do it via demo. So, the same, essentially, this not like these guys try any less hard.
It's the same product.
So you got to figure out what scale you need, but you end up doing a session at 10 a.m. and you could make $800.
Right.
And if you are working on a really big artist, they'll do double master scale and triple scale. So you can make
Never seen triple scale. That's very rare.
Rare.
Yeah. Reggie Young may have pulled that off a few times.
But some of these guys, you could work in a session and be getting, $1,600, $2,000. That's really rare. But a top call session musician in Nashville is working at times 10 a.m., 2, and 6. How much?
Possibly different studios, all three of those.
Tell me, what's in a really busy period for you? What's a week look like?
Well, typically, it might be I'm doing Monday and Tuesday on a record date. 2 days there.
Full days.
Full days, master scale.
So
right?
three sessions booked.
Most of the time, master sessions are 2 sessions. Master recordings are 2 sessions. Not all the time. So that's $850 for Monday. So $1,700 for the 2 days, right?
Yeah.
And then Wednesday, I might have a demo at 2:00, right? That's a couple $100. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'm doing a custom record that they're filing under low budget for an indie artist that just doesn't have the dough to do master scale. But it's full days, so it's like $250 a session, so $750 a day times 3.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Bass player dude.
But,
when
but
you think about
there are weeks, too, where you go, is my phone on? What the hell? Is it? Did I pay my bill?
Yeah. Well, at the end and then you get these bonus payments if you play on hits from Sound Exchange?
There's two different bonuses for session players. One is called special payments, and that happens on the 1st of August every year. And that's based on how many master sessions you did. How many times did you sign a card as a master session player, right? And it does matter on how well those records did, but it's more about how many you filed. And leaders get double on those. And the other one is the Sound Exchange thing that comes through satellite radio, I believe.
Right.
And that's the SAG-AFTRA check, and that comes on April the 30th every year.
So at the end of the year...
And that's become a pretty viable thing for us.
Yeah. At the end of the year, you're kind of blown away at the amount you think someone says, he plays guitar for a living. He plays bass for a living.
It's a career, man.
It's tough to become you, right? To do the commitment that gets you to the place after the 30 years of being at the level you are. But you can make a great living doing it. And then you go out on the road. A lot of these guys do sessions Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and maybe Thursday, and then they're out on the road, get on the bus Thursday night, and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they get back Sunday, and then they're back, like Danny Rader, who's out with Keith Urban.
Right.
He's booking sessions all early week.
Yep.
Doing custom stuff at his house, and then going out and touring with Keith Urban.
Yeah, it's keeping that ball rolling, man. It was just whatever you got to do.
And that's just your sessions come from other sessions. I mean, at this point, it's like how do you staying this busy?
It's all still word of mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, after 30 years and lots of records, I've got a certain name recognition in this town. But, I'll work on new stuff, too, where it's like, I heard, Near, gave my name to Caroline Jones, and word of mouth.
You
Always.
said you were just on the Caroline Jones this last record, and it was one of your favorite. You wanted to cancel the rest of your week.
I wish
to
I
stay
had
on the
canceled the rest of my week to do all of her records. They called me for the whole thing, but I could only do 2 days. But she was so cool, and the music was stunningly good. And, that's not every day.
Yeah, that's cool, man. You have your own studio at your house?
Yes.
Do you do a lot of internet
I do.
based stuff? Okay. And do you have a website?
I do, markhillbassplayer.com.
MarkHillBassPlayer.com. Just in case you forgot.
Self-explanatory.
Okay, Instagram.
I don't do
Facebook.
any social media. I'm an idiot.
No, that's probably.
Oh, if you're an
I think
idiot.
you'll find out that that's probably you'll be the last guy left.
I
you know?
had a Facebook account for about 3 months, and I just found it painfully icky.
Okay. So if people want to hire you to play bass on something, they can hightail you, or you send it, or get some sort of media file to you at that
Totally.
email.
Yeah, I do it all the
website.
time.
All right, great. Well, we appreciate you, buddy.
Thank you, Joe.
You're one of my favorite
Mike,
people
thank
and
you.
bass
Oh,
players.
So kind.
Thanks for coming on and hanging out
Awesome.
with
Thanks
us.
for having me.
And I guess that's it. We want to thank Eli Dykstra,
Way
for
to go,
engineering
Eli.
and producing today. Thank you, buddy. And we will see you next time. We're signing off from the West Barn.